I'm Steve Kep, co-founder of From Day One. In today's webinar, we'll be exploring a timely topic, how employees can embrace the meaning in their work. This year, we've seen a historic level of disruption in the workplace, including millions of Americans adapting to remote work, as well as major changes to offices, factory floors, retail establishments, and more. But a few key factors have remained the same. Studies show that employees perform better and lead more satisfying lives when they find their work meaningful. Yet managers often struggle with how to help their employees frame their work in a way that keeps them engaged by seeing the impact of their efforts. In the face of major upheaval all around them, social, economic, and pandemic, how can we help employees embrace their work as relevant and significant? How can we help them overcome fatigue from dealing with so much change and build resilience for the next chapters? Before we dive into this topic, we'd like to thank our partners Attuned and Achievers. I'll tell you a little bit about them. Attuned generates insights and actions based on each employee's intrinsic motivation for better communication, morale, team effectiveness, and productivity. Going beyond engagement, Attuned gives managers the power to make work more meaningful. Achievers, employee voice and recognition solutions, bring your organization's values and strategy to life. Activate employee participation and fuel a culture of performance to experience data-driven business results. A few quick logistical items. This webinar is being recorded and will be available on demand within 24 hours after the event. Look out for an email in about 24 hours that will have the link. That email will also have info on how you can get professional development credits for this session from the Society of Human Resource Management. And look out for a written account of the conversation soon on our website at fromdayone.co. Around 3 p.m., we will have a Q&A session. You can submit your questions at any time using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Now I'd like to introduce our moderator, Seth Green, who is a lecturer in business at Loyola University, Chicago, and the founding director of the Baumhart Center, which focuses on corporate citizenship. Okay, Seth, over to you.
Thank you so much, Steve, and thank you all for joining us. This is a topic that is near and dear to my heart, and one that I know many of you are hearing more about in recent months, but that has been an upward trend now for the last decade. There are a number of studies that look at what business professionals want in their work, and if you look over the last decade, you'll see that we've gone from a place where about half of individuals expected to find social or environmental impact as part of their responsibilities to a place where now 9 in 10 of the students graduating from business school want that to be a core part of their impact. And so this is something that has been supercharged by recent events, and rightly so, but it's something that we believe is a long-term sustainable trend. And we have 4 people here who are going to help us look deeper at how you find and activate that meaning at work and in the broader purpose of your company. And so I'm going to introduce them just by name now, because my first question for them is going to be for them to introduce themselves. We have Casey Wall of Attuned, we have Vivian Greentree of Fiserv, we have Allison Satter-Hill of Rourke Capital Group, and we have Kembra Hendricks of the United States House of Representatives. And so, Kembra, maybe we can start with you. Who are you? What's your current role? And how do you personally find purpose and meaning at work?
My name is Kembra Hendricks. I am the Director of Diversity for the U.S. House of Representatives. And I would say that our role is a little bit different in terms of, and I think that directly reflects in how we find purpose. Necessarily, the people in our workplace are driven by service. And so there is the purpose in helping professionals in a work environment where they are driven by service to the American people, grow as professionals, and engage with the American public and support the legislative needs and needs of their members and the constituents who they work directly with. And then there's a little part of me, I started my career as a teacher, so that coaching and professional development and watching people grow over time is knowing that that growth directly impacts in some small ways, has ripples across the country, is incredibly fulfilling and is a privilege. So I would say that would be one way that I get to find purpose in my work.
Awesome, thank you. And we're going to elevate themes over time. And my hunch is that we're going to find this idea of people and connection and growth is a big part of how so many find purpose. Whatever you do, it's something that can be found from, the widget factory floor all the way into, the halls of politics. Vivian, can we come to you and hear about how you have approached finding purpose and meaning, and tell us about yourself alongside?
Sure, thanks, Seth. And this is such a great group of people, and I think Steve said a great group of topics, and it's a good recipe for meaningful conversations and a nice use of our time together. And so I'm really excited to just be here and be part of it. And we'll be scribbling my own notes because I hope to learn as much from everyone else. I'm head of global corporate citizenship at Fiserv. Recently merging with First Data to become the world's biggest, and we like to think best fintech on the planet. I think, I believe, it's not surprising to hear me say this as the head of global corporate citizenship, but, at a private sector company, I do believe in the very, kind of fabric of my being that any definition of success, personal or professional, has to include service to others. And that's really been my North Star for my career, when I started in the Navy on the nonprofit side. And even now, in the private sector, I think we have a special, unique opportunity to engage, our own team members, but the communities that we live and work in. Because I agree with Kimba, people are naturally purpose-driven, and they do make decisions based, on where they want to work, where they want to shop, who they want to do business with based on their values. And that companies, when we can be conscientious decision makers, we will see that impact, to create shared value together.
Thank you, Viv. And can we go to you, Allison, and hear who you are and how you personally find purpose and meaning at work?
Sure. Thank you so much. And agree with both of their comments in terms of it's such a great topic, and I just really appreciate being a part of the conversation. So, like he said, I'm Allison Hill. I'm the head of diversity and social responsibility for Rourke Capital Group. And just to give a little background, because Rourke is a little bit under the radar, but we're a private equity firm. We're based in Atlanta. And the way that private equity works, you have institutional investors or, long-term investors that invest in us. And then we turn around and purchase different companies. So we're actually, surprisingly, the second largest restaurant holder in the United States. So we have about 18 billion of assets under management and 670,000 people in the portfolio. And we have really fun consumer brands like Orange Theory Fitness or Arby's, and then of course Cinnabon, which everybody loves. And so my role is new, and the founder wanted to have this role developed because it is unusual for a middle market PE firm to have it. It's definitely forward thinking, but I think he knew these topics are so important. It can't be a side hustle for someone. It has to have that 24/7 focus to really make a difference and to push it forward. So my role is really twofold. One is to lead the firm's inclusion efforts, particularly in alternative investments. You have a low amount of women that are even interested, let alone other underrepresented groups. So we do a lot around recruiting, educational formats, refining just those inclusive behaviors as a firm, and then also run some portfolio-driven things like our women's network for our top portfolio women leaders or other DEI shared learning and strategic planning. And then on the other side, I lead philanthropic and service efforts. So for us, these are focused on Atlanta since we're an Atlanta-based firm, and it's a platform that's all about uplifting, educating, and empowering children with wraparound services. So we try to thread our DEI work into also the philanthropy work that we do. And so, sorry, to answer your question about purpose, like all those things are so fulfilling and amazing, but I think something to reflect what Kemba said is, for me, the most fulfilling thing is when you see other people come on the journey with you and you see their behaviors transformed and they're excited about the community and they're wanting to take accountability for diversity and inclusion changes. That's definitely the most fulfilling part, is being part of a team.
Well, so Casey, you're going to round us out here. Who are you? What's your role? And how do you find purpose and meaning? And help others do the same.
So I'm Casey. I'm joining here from in the wee hours of the night in Tokyo. I'm the founder of Attuned.ai and the CEO. And what we do is we provide a solution. So we're a fast growing startup, and we're providing a solution, a web-based solution for intrinsic motivation based on psychology and AI to help organizations all over the world. So we have kind of organizations and companies in Europe and Africa and the US, Japan here as well, that we help managers understand their employees at a deeper level. So to them see what is usually not able to be seen. So what is their intrinsic motivation? How do you actually have meaningful conversations with them to get the most kind of excitement and perseverance out of them by inspiring that intrinsic motivation? So we're doing this, at the team level, we're doing this at the enterprise level. So I think really for me, kind of echoing on some of the topics that were, talked about for, what brings purpose is certainly kind of delivering something beyond me and being part of something bigger than myself is, and really kind of helping change lives by helping people to be understood better. And I think when you can understand people, you can bring more compassion in the workplace. But just like Allison said, I think now that we're growing quite well, we're trying to go IPO pretty soon, that the team around you, so we have like very energizing, smart people. I'm not the smartest person in the room for sure, and kind of working with them, getting really kind of human kind of perspectives. So what we're bringing is more kind of psychology and human understanding to that. So working with kind-hearted people that are smart, really trying to do things is just fantastic, I think, for kind of enshrouding me in purpose here.
Well, just to bring together some of the themes, I mean, it sounds like the two common denominators are that you're finding it in the people around you and in the work that you're doing. And that those two, especially when they're combined, really can help you find that motivation. And so I want to use what Casey just mentioned as a segue into the next question I have for this panel, which is, why does purpose at work matter? So, Casey just mentioned all the work that Attuned is doing to really be able to look at motivation and look at how people come to that connection to what they do. But I want to just kind of step back and say the so what question. Why does purpose at work matter? How does it help you build a better company? And maybe, Vivian, we can start with you because I know you are doing that at Fiserv, and you've done that, through a major merger and through a lot of other exciting moments. And so let's start with you, and then we'll come to Casey and the others.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that purpose has always mattered. I mean, we know it has, researchers show, but it's always mattered, and showed the centrality that purpose has towards, I think, Casey, engagement, satisfaction, performance, morale, retention, and all those things that at the individual and collective level that together, cost save or drive revenue. However, I don't think that purpose and the need to co-align purpose with mission and the organizational operating systems, that we've set up and how we manage people and resources, has had as much space as it has right now when we are in the middle of, this global pandemic. We are in each other's homes right now. And, talking about just the effects that isolation have had, anxiety, change management, and then you overlay on that, certainly in the U.S., national dialogue on race and systematic discrimination, and that it's a reckoning time right now, and not in just boardrooms, but in classrooms and kitchen tables, on what what it's not just like to have equity or have courageous conversations, but what inclusive leaders do. And so I do think we've been forced to, but I think there's an opportunity to have taken a pause and maybe reconsider what we, as our recovery efforts include in the recovery process, build a new future, a new workforce, a new kind of paradigm around, what purpose means at work, and the very real recognition that the more that we divorce purpose from passion, to your daily life, the less that we'll all be for it. And we'll lose discretionary effort. We'll lose the kind of creativity, the engagement that really is where, we want to build our castles together.
And I'll just affirm what you've said. One of the executives that we know well as a center and we really admire is Hamdi Ulukaya at Chobani. And when he talks about building the company, one explanation he gives for how they've been so far ahead of the curve is that when everyone joins, he tells them that the goal of the business is to change the world. And everyone wants to be a part of that, and everyone wants to be the best when they know that there's a higher purpose there that they are motivated toward. And so I think there is that creativity that is unleashed when people are able to bring that passion, and they want to be thinking about it in the middle of the night because they're so excited to contribute to something larger. Casey, we want to hear from you, especially as someone who looks at this, with analytics in hand a lot of times and is able to see these connections, in quantitative as well as qualitative form.
Yeah, I think you kind of really answered the question right there as well. Is like kind of what Vivian was saying is we're at a moment in time where we can kind of rethink how does an organization work. And what we're looking at is in the organizations that most of us live in like today are still based on 100 years ago in kind of the time of Taylorism and, the Industrial Revolution, when it's about efficiency of process type of thing. And that's where kind of the management techniques are come. But now that we've had this kind of grand work experiment where we've all been forced to kind of come back, think, what are our values? What do we really want out of life? What motivates us as individuals? How do we find kind of, happiness and truth in kind of our own organizations? And now I think organizations have to shift to this, to really understand what individuals want out of that. So going back to the purpose, like what you've spoken about, Shivani, is, okay, from the corporate side is, okay, we have to give a vision, we have to give a direction and more meaning to the work rather than just kind of shareholder profits. It needs to be about the stakeholders. And that's going to allow you to attract people and retain people. And now I think the gap that we have is, okay, individuals are understanding and thinking about their lives and what it is that gets them really intrinsically motivated. So on like, a cold, rainy Monday, which is probably upon us pretty soon, is how am I going to get out of bed and how am I going to be excited and how am I going to persevere towards those difficult goals? And now as an organization, it's that middle component. How do we make that kind of connection between here's, the big kind of meaningful vision that the leaders are giving, and here's the individual needs that we have kind of intrinsically. So how can managers and organizations create the situation so people can kind of like sprout as a flower and you kind of be the unique flowers and, just have like 1,000 blooms and, where we can all come and create that creativity. So I think the core of it is if you've got intrinsic motivation in the workplace and you get rid of kind of extrinsic motivation, which is too much in the vocabulary still, that's where you get the creativity. That's where you kind of get the persistence. You're going to get more energy. If you get more energy from me, if I'm intrinsically motivated, my teammate's going to get intrinsically motivated, being social beings type of thing like that.
Well, so Allison, I want to come to you because you're in private equity setting as you introduced at the start. And I want to hear from you kind of how this shows up. And then we're going to come over to Kemba and hear how this looks in another sector of the economy. But Allison, you first.
Okay, great. And I loved what both Vivian and Casey were saying. In fact, Casey, I was picturing, Holland and all the tulips during that. But what you all are talking about being a part of something bigger reminds me of one of my favorite little adages about President Kennedy visiting NASA, if you all remember this one. And he met a janitor and he asked him what he did. And he said, I'm helping to put a man on the moon. And I think that just kind of sums up what both of them were saying in terms of you just want to feel like you're a part of something big and much bigger than yourself. And people definitely are deeper than they seem like than on Facebook. Like people want and crave that, just being a part of a puzzle that's something bigger. And I think there's tons of research out there, and Vivian and Casey were touching on some of it. Employee turnover is going to be less. You're going to have higher performance. I think one of the things that I love that Bright House, who's a part of BCG, has put out is that companies with purpose actually have their employees inspired 2.5 more times. So you think about that inspiration, and then what you were saying, Seth, about creativity and innovation, because you think about COVID and its effects on what we own, which is restaurants and retail. So we were in the bullseye, and the way that these portfolio companies have completely innovated focused on their priorities and have turned lemons into lemonade with tons of innovation and creativity, it's because those companies were giving people something to be excited about and have that purpose. And so I think that's really the biggest thing is, if you have that sense of why, it's really going to impact performance, but mostly coming out of COVID, the innovation and creativity is going to be key.
So Kevin, we want to come to you now because you are in another sector. As you mentioned at the outset, there is a natural purpose in the service that people are up to. At the same time, I imagine even in an incredible place like the House of Representatives, there are moments probably where people feel drained or challenged in that purpose. And so really curious, how does this show up in your world? Why does purpose matter at work at the U.S. House of Representatives?
There's a very easy answer to that, and then there's one that's more complicated. So the very easy answer is like we have a very young, and then goes back to parents. We have a very young workforce, and so they have to remain engaged and motivated and directly tied. And so there's that kind of positive reinforcement that we have, because so much of our work is you can see the impact. You have direct connection with the constituents. If you worked in the district, your member can get positive feedback or negative feedback. There's always that kind of one-to-one direct positive or negative reinforcement. But for employees, like we work really hard when we work really hard. Hours are not common. 40-hour work week is something that most of us laugh at. And then being public service, there's not that natural high salary or bonuses or some of those other things that can be used as other kinds of motivators. And so for our employees, it really has to be that they see that their work impacts people in a positive way, and they have to be able to see the growth or the opportunity, and they kind of have to believe in, because it'll wear you out very, very quickly if you can't remain motivated or see the purpose in the work that you're doing. So I think it is inherently tied, just so that our employees avoid burnout.
Well, so this is essential to motivate, especially in an economy that is more creative and less about just pure production than ever before. And on top of that, this is something that everyone needs to rely on, especially in moments like this one, where there are other stressors that might lead to burnout or to, a sense of discouragement. And so purpose matters. There is a lot of data academically, I can say, that backs all of what you've set up statistically in terms of showing that people that say they are motivated at work are higher performers, they have less absentee days, they are viewed by evaluative studies as having significantly higher productivity. And investments in purpose actually pay off in many of the studies, 5 to 10-fold. So the case is there. And now the hard part that hopefully people in our audience are wondering is, how do I do this? And I think there are two pieces of it, and I want to go through both with you as panelists, right? One is, at your core, you have to be authentically purposive. And so I want to take some time and dig in, because each of you are at purposive institutions and businesses, to understand how do you actually set purpose at the core? And then the follow-up question will be about, how do we actually make that meaningful for employees, right? Because you don't want it to be the tree in the forest. You want it to be something that everyone hears, everyone feels, everyone is engaged by. But let's start on the fundamentals of running a business or institution with purpose. And Allison, I want to come to you, because in your introduction, you talked about how the leader of the private equity firm, which is unique among private equity, really wanted this to be core. They wanted a position like yours because they wanted this to run through everything that happened at the enterprise. And so we'll start with you, and then we're going to come to the others on this question of, how do you insert purpose into the core of what you do?
So I think this is such a great question, because I think my position is more a reflection of what the purpose already was and is. Because like, as we all talked about, the teamwork, the result that comes from when your leader is emulating what the purpose is. And that get people to create these emotional ties. But for the fundamental part of this, I think you really have to take a step back and see, what is your business achieving and delivering on that is super unique to itself and its strengths. And then that becomes your why. So it can't be like this made up purpose that we want to do this. It has to be core to what you do, timeless and inspirational. my recommendation would be that companies really need to think through what they do at their best as a complement to whatever their mission and vision is, because this would go over that. But I think there's another key component to this is how you operate, and is your purpose along with your core values. And our core values are the cornerstone of how we operate. And so those two have to be in connection with one another. So we're all about continuous improvement, treating investors' money as if it was our own, doing what's right and long-term smart, good partners in good times, great partners in bad times is one of my favorite, especially from the COVID season. And what I mean by this in terms of purposes, we look at Rourke and what we were talking about, that we have institutional investors that invest in us. So you have your Harvards, your Princetons, state pension funds. So Neil Aronson, our founder, is really clear to talks about this all the time, that when Rourke does well, it means more teachers, more firemen are able to enjoy their retirement, more kids get scholarships to schools like Harvard, Yale, Emory, and kids are healed, from CHOP, Invest in Us, and CHOA, so the Children's Hospitals of Philly and Atlanta. So I think that's what threads through. And so it's not just a person analyzing a spreadsheet. It's like, how am I going to do the best agents to buy the best company at the price? It's creating these great partnerships with our company. So it really does weave in to everything we do, but it has to be really authentic and about your uniqueness as a company.
Well, so we're going to transition to Vivian's thoughts on this, but I just want to call out that we're going to come back to a lot of your ideas, Allison, because not only did you express the purpose in terms of those values, but also how your CEO begins to engage everyone in it. And I think that, that twinning is really a powerful connection, because you begin to have that opportunity for deep motivation. Vivian, your thoughts on this as a leader who is integrating this in a different context at Fiserv through, a combination, which is always one that is trying on culture.
Yeah, and I mean, to echo Allison's, the purpose and purposeful, and using your first best use of resources towards your mission and how that can align with creating meaning and opportunities for meaningful engagement. And then another kind of element I want to bring in and highlight is that's also a wonderful opportunity to align diversity and inclusion, because everything that you do with your mission should have an eye towards that increasing access, reducing obstacles, and it ties right back into purpose in that, you want to be a mirror and not a window, so that other, people see themselves as part of what you're doing and not kind of, back looking in, as an other. And so, we know that companies and communities that are intentional about using their resources and their purpose and their mission, towards creating open and inclusive cultures where everyone has an equitable opportunity to join and belong and, contribute and progress and really feel valued. That is that human capital piece that, creates community partnerships where they then volunteer, and maybe they're volunteering to help children and the communities, maybe they're helping other professionals, maybe they're helping students, because of what Fiserv does every day to help, Main Street to Wall Street. We have a special emphasis on supporting small, diverse businesses and ensuring that, being from Georgia, Alice, they can play with the big dogs, as they say at the University of Georgia. And so we prepare them to help access, get access to capital, create, networks. And so we have a special emphasis and attention to helping small, diverse businesses through supplier diversity, financial institutions. And at the end of the day, that imbues what someone does every day with a larger sense of, you're not just servicing a client, but potentially you're helping a woman-owned business hire another, woman, make enough money, sell enough widgets to be able to support and create opportunities for another woman, or a veteran, or a minority, or LGBTQ owned business that we work with. And so it's really, when D&I, associate engagement, community engagement, and philanthropy are done collaboratively and strategically, we have better, outcomes where everyone can say, I am a valued member of this high performing winning team, and I'm doing meaningful work in this environment of trust. And I was looking at Casey, Allison, and Kim to hit all those points that we talked about earlier.
want to echo what you're saying with data, because there is a statement I love that the businesses that perform best in motivating their workforce do good at what they're good at doing. And there's a lot of data that when people see that connection between what their core talents and assets are as an institution and how that relates to social and environmental issues. And so in your case, a financial institution, looking at how do we expand financial access and how do we make sure that we use our financial strength to energize diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? That is going to have an even greater impact and a greater motivation for your employees. And even if you did something that was awesome, but in a totally separate area that may not have that sense of resonance to what people do every day. We are going to pause here for just a moment, and then we're going to come back and hear Casey and Kemba's views for a station identification. Over to you, Steve.
Hi, everyone. I'm Steve Kep. I'd like to remind anyone joining our webinar in midstream that we're from day one, and we're exploring how employees can embrace the meaning in their work. Our sponsors are Attuned and Achievers, and our moderator is Seth Green, founder of the Baumhart Center for Social Enterprise and Responsibility at Loyola University Chicago. As a reminder, you can submit your questions at any time, and we'll answer as many as we can during the Q&A session. Now back to you, Seth.
Thank you, Steve. And I want to now come to you, Kemba. And I'm really curious of how you see kind of running with purpose in the halls of the U.S. House of Representatives, and how you feel like you're able to deliver on those purposive ideas, even amidst what we know, is a very eclectic, sometimes charged, sometimes tense, sometimes political institution. I think you may have one of the greatest challenges, but I know that you are up to it. So I want to hear how you do it.
I appreciate your confidence. I would say that there's kind of a twofold goal. I think I look at the work that my responsibility is kind of assistance in talent acquisition and management consulting and those kinds of roles, and then also connecting that to thinking about the people who are doing the work and how that impacts the purpose. And so I think one feeds the other. And so I appreciate that I get to learn from the people who are coming to me for their executive coaching and for their onboarding assistance and for their professional development. And I look at that as like that's my that one chance that I have to be able to help person. I understand numbers not at all, but there are people who understand financial technology and financial services and industries that I would not be the person you should recommend to do. But then I can see how that helps and lends into the organization. But then you also have to look at how the organization takes input and takes stakeholder engagement and takes community engagement and takes, as an organization, that is our primary focus and our primary responsibility. And so all of those things directly bring people together, bring information together, bring perspectives together. And that feeds innovation necessarily, because our job is to take all of that and however it comes out and then make determinations on how allocations of resources are going to be met. And it requires all of those different inputs. It is better done if we have all of those different inputs and all of those different opinions and all of those different ideologies at the table. We're able to do better work. So I see my role as kind of, there's this one role that I have, but I do see how it has ripples of impact within the other components of the work that is done.
Thank you, Kemba. And Casey, we're going to come to you now. And I want to say that in some ways we're coming to another context, because while you're in the private sector, you started this company. It has an entrepreneurial feel. And so there are some differences when you're building a company in terms of how to integrate purpose and also how it feels to the employees. And so I'm curious for you, kind of how you've approached this in your work.
Yeah, thank you. Like it's interesting, like as a startup, as a CEO, right, you have to come out, you have to express the vision, you have to say, here's the meaning and this is why we're coming to work. And, it allows you to attract your team if you're doing a good job of expressing that. But also you didn't have a culture before, so you have to create the culture from scratch. And, I haven't always had the best of cultures. So, we've kind of made mistakes. And I think that kind of connects back to what we're talking about is, leaders need to create and define the purpose and make it very clear. but it has to be repeated and repeated and repeated. So, sometimes as a CEO, like I'm saying the same thing over and over. So it might not be that interesting for me, but it's interesting for the team members, and it's very, very important for the team members to hear that. And I think it's about doing those reps in terms of communication, and, not just verbally, but you also have to have the reps in written. So, managers and kind of the people that are actually doing the work can easily reference what is the purpose. And, I love data. We're trying to bring data to something that isn't usually seen, but really as humans, it's the story, going back to that, little kind of story that Allison gave about JFK and NASA and the janitor. That's what people remember. So as leaders, we need to give stories about our organization, about how we are making particular impact. And I think that's critical, and not just, okay, data is important once in a while, but it's those stories that emotionally charge us and get us to remember to do that there. And I think really the hard part is, how do you enable kind of the people in the middle of your organization to take this purpose and communicate it to really the people on the front line? And Kemba mentioned earlier that, people that join the House of Representatives are motivated by purpose and helping the community and social impact type of thing like that. But I'd still wager, like as you referenced as well, Seth, people have very individualistic, kind of goals and things. And what we found through our own data is there's 1.7 million different intrinsic motivation profiles. And this is why kind of management is so difficult and is an art. So I think you have to help those managers, okay, communicate, tell the story, so they can manage these diverse personalities and align them with the organization. So I think that's the real difficult part of it, connecting the individual to the group, and that part that we need to get stronger and better at as pretty much organizations globally.
Well, so I think we've actually accomplished a lot of this question around how do we engage employees in a conceptual sense. And so I'm going to tweak that question I had foreshadowed earlier a little bit. And I would love to go deep with each of you on a tangible example that you've seen that has really helped to connect people to the purpose of the company or institution. And I'll make this popcorn style. So, we will see which of you wants the pop person to answer this question, which of you has the most memorable example here. But I'd love to give the audience just some really tangible kind of, role model examples. And I see you unmuting, Vivian. So that's always my sign as a moderator. Go for it. Get us started.
So one, and I was working like right up until we got on this call today, working on it, is our Back to Business campaign to help small Black and minority owned businesses recover from COVID, and also, involve our employee resource groups around the things that they do for work every day. So coaching, mentoring. We've also added this community, we're launching a grant program across the country. And part of that, the grant program, or the $10 million investment into small minority owned businesses, is investment into community groups that are doing that work and have been doing that work holistically and within the ecosystems. So we're working with local chambers of commerce, national groups like Blavity and Official Black Wall Street. I don't know if it's okay to mention, but it's like driving business to these small businesses is like what we do all day. And it's very exciting to bring everyone around on the journey. And I have, through the grant program, through relationship managing with the community investment partners, through volunteering to coach or mentor the small businesses. And we've really seen, just huge engagement around it. And luckily, with the structures we have set up with our employee resource groups, along with our, business consultants and team members across the, country, we're able to funnel that passion in a purposeful way that also, helps the clients that we already had who were already struggling. To Allison's point, in COVID, small businesses have to make websites that they've never had to make before. And once they do that and move payment online, now they're worried about cyber security in a way that they haven't before. And all of these things we're already set up to help with. And now we get to do it as part of this Back to Business campaign. So I would say that.
Well, I love that example because I think it speaks to this broader idea, which I've heard so many fabulous CEOs talk about post-COVID, which is their immediate instinct as purpose-based leaders, which was all of these, really challenging things are happening. How can we be part of the solution? right? And obviously you're going to have tough choices. You're going to have to make pivots. You're going to be at a company that's going to be set back by aspects of this pandemic. But instead of thinking in that kind of very limited, narrow horizon, right, which is not going to inspire the creativity of your teams, right? You have to acknowledge all of that. You have to be real about it. But to immediately go to, we have this incredible asset. How do we be part of the solution? How do we help these businesses that we know are struggling for no fault of their own because of both the systemic racism and the pandemic? How do we help them to thrive? How do we take all of these assets, right? And imagine how that unleashes the creativity within your company to be in that mindset versus the deficit mindset. Who else wants to share an example that they think of? And it doesn't have to be, current. It could be something that you've seen in the past. Allison, we'll come to you.
Okay, great. So Vivian, love your work. I can't wait to have our coffee one of these days so I can hear more about it. But I want to touch a little bit too on what Casey was talking about for culture, because I think one of the interests about culture is that it can flow beyond your four walls, and it can flow into all of the stakeholders of the business. And that's the example that I want to talk about is, when we're talking about the articulation, sometimes the purpose is just the articulation of what you do, right? So it's instead of work saying, we deliver top returns for our investors, we turn it into, we unlock potential and allow people to thrive, or the world to thrive, or whatever lofty term. But I think that really gets people excited, and when it aligns with you. So my example is, COVID hit, like I said, we were in the bullseye, right? Gyms are closed, restaurants are closed. And these are a lot of workers. I said in the beginning, in our portfolio, 670,000 people. And that was when Neil was like, what are we going to do? Like, what are we going to do? Like, there's going to be many furloughed people due to no fault of their own. And how are we going to help them? So we set out to raise money. And so the first step was, we set a goal. Let's raise $5 million that we can distribute out to the portfolio companies so they can stand up, or we can help bolster some of their relief funds so that people that really cannot put food on the table, buy their medicine, buy their diapers, that they can get some immediate assistance, because the government was still, figure out what they were going to do. So we were like, everything was so uncertain. So the first thing we did was raise internally, and 100% of team members contributed. These are people that said, I want to donate X amount until the restaurants reopen. I want to donate X% of my bonus. It was like the most heartwarming thing ever. But the most interesting part is when we reached out, like this culture bubble, the part that we work with, our investors that invest in us, believed in us so much that they gave money to this relief fund. And then our founder matched another $3 million to that. And we ended up having $8 million within weeks that we could send out to the portfolio companies. So that's what I mean. Like, everybody had something to believe in that was so Rourke, if that makes sense. Like, everything to do with our purpose, everything to do with our core values. And everyone just bought in internally, and our close-knit group externally.
And it's a great story, Allison, because it speaks to both the purpose prior to that moment and then how you activated it in that moment. Because the fact that you had already told people their jobs were about more than just making money, they were about 600,000 people, they were about all of these other pieces. Then when this moment hit, everyone felt compelled because they knew they were part of a broader ecosystem and not just part of a single bottom line business. Casey or Kemba, we're going to invite you in next. Get us started, Casey. And then
go ahead, Kemba.
Kemba, go for it.
I'm sorry, I thought I had unmuted. I would use the example of the creation of the office that I now represent. The House of Representatives is not been required to follow like those HR compliant or those EEO requirements that most other companies do. So a creation of an office of diversity and equity and inclusion really grew out of a responsiveness to the needs expressed by the members and by the employee affinity organizations within the House as a desperate need to have different viewpoints in member offices to help them craft legislation, to have people who could reflect all components, because political offices kind of historically have looked a lot like campaigns, which have been somewhat homogenous in the past. And so in coming in, we want to make sure that members can connect with farmers, and farming is different in Iowa than it is in California, is different than it is in Georgia, and making sure that people who understand all those differences are at the table in helping decisions be made. So the creation of this office, and it is very new, the creation of this office came as a demand for that need and providing the resources to the body to be able to effectuate that.
Well, that is a thrilling example, because we are very grateful to know that you are there and that you are helping to move that forward. And Casey, you are our final example, and then I'm going to start moving over to audience questions. So tip to our audience, start sending in your questions.
So coming from kind of the smaller business perspective as a startup, so we've got about 50 people in the organization now. And what we've seen, and what I've really liked with kind of this Corona type of situation, is Zoom's become a kind of a great democratizer in a certain sense. Is, you know, now where transparency is one of our written goals as a company, but now what we've opened up is our management meetings, kind of our executive meetings, our board meetings. So all members of the company can kind of sign on to Zoom, and physically it wasn't possible to get everybody in the same place to do that. And now they can see how, you know, decisions are made. So our vision at Attuned is, you know, intrinsic motivation to make work more meaningful, and trying to deliver that at a global scale, which means understanding people at the individual level and trying to shape kind of the structure of work in a personalized way to deal with whatever that individual's needs are, their life situation. So as we have to make kind of corporate policies and corporate decisions, they can feel, you know, corporate and not very thoughtful and very individual. But by opening this up and allowing everybody to be an equal sized box, you know, it feels like they're part of it, and you know, gives them kind of connection and to understand, okay, that decision wasn't just to make more profits, or wasn't just to cut costs, you know, like heartlessly. There was a meaning, and it's still all connecting to the purpose of the organization. So I think this is a great time, at least for smaller organizations or smaller divisions. You can open up more transparently how decisions are made, and that'll make it easier for the individual to connect to the group's purpose.
Well, and we have a few questions that relate to that, and I want to start with two of them at once, because I think they're very related, and then you can choose kind of how you can answer the combination here. So Amy writes, I would love some practical ideas to help employees embrace meaning in their work when they are in more transaction processor kind of roles, especially as the team is all remote during this time. And Eleni writes, what advice do you have with inspiring other employees to find and feel the purpose their work is contributing while they are working entirely remotely from the rest of the staff? How can we encourage the meaning of each team member's work, even if it is mainly administrative, to be in the forefront of those workers' minds, even if they may never see or experience the impact of their work? And this reminds me, obviously, Allison, of your example from Kennedy of the janitor who realizes that they're a co-partner in launching, you know, the first person on the moon. And so, yeah, Allison, if we can start with you, and then we'll come across the group.
Yeah, just one big statement in that. I think it's 99% leadership. It's 99% how are you going to make somebody, and are you creating some sort of caste system in your company, or are you truly treating people that everybody has a unique contribution, which plays right into, I think Kemba was saying this about inclusive behaviors and everyone having a voice and a point of view, and giving that to everybody. I think at a very, you know, tactical level, I think it's really helping people understand how they're making, what their specific job is, how are they making the organization better. So just to use a restaurant example, right? You can have a corporate restaurant office, have a bunch of accountants, and you think they're just paying bills all day and that's how they feel, and they come in and they go out by 5. But if you start tying their bonuses and some of the leadership practices and things to say, what you're doing is actually making the restaurants better by doing X, Y, and Z. So when they feel like you're giving service to them, your bonus can be higher. And so that's just a practical, but I think it's just really thinking through, are you communicating the right way? And what are some simple things that can be implemented into the reward and recognition process that further confirm that?
Vivian?
You're good, Seth. I love what Allison said. It's meeting them where they're at, because when you do have hourly, especially right now during, the pandemic, essential workers that have to go in, it's meeting them where they're at. There's some very foundational kind of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Make sure they feel like the work that they're doing, you are supporting them with commensurate with that level of risk that they're putting themselves at to create business continuity, to delight clients, to be in an office setting. And whether that's, premium pay, the policies, which kind of plays into my second, which is, which again, Allison mentioned, was, when the crisis, when any crisis, it doesn't have to be this crisis, any crisis hits, that's really too late to think about like creating inclusive teams where everyone trusts each other. Like that has to really have already, a lot of that work should have been done already, so that you can leverage it to pivot or do, react thoughtfully and with purpose, so that you do have those foundational policies. So everyone kind of knows where they stand, and that you've built that trust up over time, so that you have that kind of, so you can grease the skids for the hard time that is upon us right now.
Casey or Kemba?
I would say like to maybe allow a little bit of chaos into the conversation a little bit. I think kind of the beauty in terms of creativity and engagement and when people kind of feel freedom is like when the power of the organization is matching kind of the power of the employees. So if you're in a transactional role, like this is uneven, right? It's probably the organization that has defined that to be a transactional role. So is it possible to just have an open conversation and let it be a little bit of chaos? You don't know how it's going to go, and say, how can we make this a little less transactional per se, and give them kind of more voice about how they want to structure the job, and can you change the job structure of that? So I think it's allowing people to have more voice, which gives them more recourse and more ownership. And it doesn't really kind of matter the level or the type of job. I think if you give them that, you're going to be able to find shifts, and rather than to, this is what I think needs to be done for them, it's let's listen first and then make some decisions based on that.
Kemba, final word on this one?
This wasn't as hard. I think we have an unfair advantage that so much of our work is making sure that people know that we're doing these great things and communicating that to everyone else. And so a component of how do you take that and make that motivational is, I guess, bring those stories back to your own employees. Our teams are really small. So the benefit of that is as employees are connected to their members, are connected to their chiefs, they get to have an understanding of what's happening in the district versus what's happening with the member in their political life versus what's happening with the member in their legislative life. And so it's that comprehension of how all of those pieces tie together that we inherently have to do, that I would say is the unfair advantage that we have. Each employee directly knows how they fit into all of those places. So to some degree for us, it is inherent in the design of how offices are working and how offices are working together. That is that constant loop of, here is the benefit, this is why we did it, this is where we're going in those next, that is the underlying motivator for so much of what is happening at the time. And the requirement to then elevate that to different outlets and communicate it to different streams of stakeholders, media, news media, all of that is so much of a part of what we do. It's hard to lose sight of the focus sometimes, which conversely sometimes is the rub, which is sometimes that is the rub of it. But most of the time we have this unfair advantage in that our work is so narrative based that we can use that as a direct tie to constantly motivate our employees.
So our next question is from someone who really wants to be like you. She sees you as a role model and is curious kind of how each of you found your way to intersections of profit and purpose, or purpose plus purpose in your case, Kemba. And I realize, Casey, you started your business, so maybe we'll come to you last on this one and how you did that. But I'm curious maybe to start with Kemba, who is a leader in diversity and inclusion, Vivian, who's in corporate social responsibility, Allison, who's looking across the enterprise at purpose. Kind of how do you think you set yourselves up? And if you had tips for people who are joining us who want to go more in that direction, is there education? Is there leadership? Is there other ways to get involved through an ERG or other ways that you recommend that they find this intersection even more deeply at their companies? Yeah, let's get started with you, Kemba.
I have a really schizophrenic resume. I'm an attorney by trade now, I'm an attorney by trade now. I think out of college, I worked in a news station, and then I spent 10 years in the classroom. So I have a very schizophrenic resume.
So that's the recipe
that's
for
the
folks
recipe.
out there. Become a teacher, a lawyer, and a radio.
No, but what I would say of all of those things and how they tie together, I'm here now because all of those things tied, I understood that what motivated me was the opportunity to be proactive in some spaces where I was reactive, and teaching taught me to be incredibly committed to professional development, and that constantly professional development and conferences and academic development. And so in each one of those iterations, I've learned to stretch myself and grow, and those muscles that you exercise as you're taking on new challenges and taking on new roles and growing have been my motivator, because each time I learn that I can do something different, it makes me better at things that I've done. And I get excited to learn new ways to do things. So if anything from that schizophrenic resume, I would say that sharpening the saw is incredibly important, and using that as a motivator to find new ways to do things in your own roles, but also find different ways and different approaches to the things that you are doing.
Well, so Vivian, maybe we can come to you next, because you've had an extraordinary background like Kemba, and also an eclectic one.
Yeah,
like
that
Kemba,
might be the theme.
leading a nonprofit, building, in a number of different ways. You are a PhD, you are a part of our service, which is a beautiful part of your background. So yeah, tell us about how you kind of found this intersection and how you came to this work.
I think I like Casey's invite chaos and Kimba's schizophrenic background, because it is true. I mean, I joined the Navy out of college, and then started, when I got off active duty, my husband was still on active duty. So I helped start a nonprofit, and then eventually ended up on the dark side in the private sector. But I think like my North Star has been that service piece, and you can always serve no matter what seat you're in. You can activate like from right where you are to put, Allison's point, like to put that man on the moon, or woman on the moon. And so I just, I would say to someone looking to get into, and I came to First Data, now Fiserv, to start our military programs to help transitioning service members and their families either find employment or start their own small businesses. And it happened to be because of the way that we looked at holistically at human capital management and engaging veterans. It was like, well, veterans would do better if we didn't make them choose between serving their country as Guard and reservists to working at our company. Well, women would do better if you didn't make them choose between starting families or working at your company. Mm-hmm. Is anything that you do to create that, schism. So we took those, rolled them into and expanded them into that idea of just, inclusion and ensuring representation and growing engagement. And so that ended up, we created this new, more expansive role, putting that together. So all that to say, persistence, I don't think you have to have a background in HR or marketing or operations or any one thing. I think it's more about like, if you see in yourself and recognize that altruism is a powerful force, and that civic spirit is the ultimate, original renewable energy for, the US and certainly other countries, but that, I feel like that's the thing. And then whatever you do that well, in your industry, in your region, and then you're doing this work, whether you're doing it from, we're all from different organizations representing different industries, but you can do it from anywhere. I think the thing that will drive it is that idea of serving others, regardless of where you sit.
Allison?
So I love both those answers, but I did not have a background in this either. So my background's more brand and marketing, but as I reflect, you never know who's watching. I would be my advice, like always have your head down, work as hard as you can, but manage yourself to your personal values and principles. And a couple examples that I would give is when I worked for Coca-Cola, I worked on global IMC, which is integrated marketing communications, which is you're trying to align the world on one creative thematic and campaign. And so just that relationship building there was really important. And then I worked for a portfolio company where I was the first marketer, like plopped into an operations company, you know, all these old boys like at the table that turned into great friends, and we were able to create something together. And I think it was that personality more than what I knew, right, that was observed of, I think Vivian said this, like in diversity and inclusion, and even in some forms philanthropy, you have to meet people where they are. If you get so upset that people don't understand the world as you see it, or like it's so important to bring people on this educational journey with you, that I think if this person that asked the question has the passion, you can learn anything. If you can read and do this, you can learn it in a heartbeat. The passion is really important. And then the second thing is just start doing things that you can, and, you know, network. And I think if a time is now to have these jobs, you're going to start seeing them pop up more and more and more and more, even in smaller companies from my observations. So just keep with your network, keep the faith, and the universe will bring you to it. I promise.
Casey?
Yeah, very similar. I come from an eclectic background as well. You know, born in upstate New York. I grew up in Saudi Arabia for 15 years. After University of Texas, I've been in Japan, and like I had a different life as a recruiter before kind of starting this one. And kind of like Allison mentioned, as an executive recruiter, I would meet executives who tried to plan their career, and those tended to be the people that were less happy, right? And, you know, the people just went, oh, this is my passion, or, you know, I met this great group and something's vibing, I don't quite understand why, and I've joined it. And, you know, I don't love quoting Steve Jobs, but really the dots connect backwards type of thing. Like I never expected I'd be doing a startup here in Japan, dealing with customers around the world. You know, I created like Japan's first startup movie that went all across theaters here, and wrote a book that became an Amazon #1 bestseller, like in Japan. Like it's just, never could have planned it, right? You know, type of thing like that. And I think you just have to kind of go to your passions, and mine come down to kind of like storytelling and psychology of the individual. And this is just take me on my own unique journey. And I think that's what we all have to embrace, is our own unique journey, and just kind of that uncertainty and that anxiety comes within uncertainty. And rather than plan it out, just here's what my passion is, here's a great group of people, and just go with the flow.
Well, so just to bring out themes again, as the academic in me, you know, this idea that you are really listening to that inner self and driven by it. So you're, you know, head down, but with those values. And the other piece that I think all of you spoke to is this understanding of the enterprise level strategy. Because one of the things we talk about, we are fortunate at Loyola University of Chicago to have the first MBA exclusively designed for purpose-driven leaders. So every class is all about how a business fundamental and purpose combine. And what we talk about constantly is you have to be business leaders first, because in order to find that intersection of profit and purpose, you have to know every possible opportunity for your business to win. And then you need to double down on every one of those places where that win can coincide with a broader opportunity to advance society. And so many of the best businesses are winning because they are using DEI. There's a great study out of BCG where companies that had DEI, meaning diversity in a number of different forms, and equity in their leadership, actually were, when you looked at it, for every percentage point, they were at a significant delta in terms of their higher EBITDA. So those interaction points are there, but they have to be found, and people that can both look for profit and purpose are able to be at that intersection. The next question we have here, I think, is really interesting, which is, have any of you seen data and metrics, a good segue from what I was mentioning, to encourage and motivate employees in their day-to-day work and progress toward long-term goals? So we're curious if you've actually seen kind of dashboards or other metrics used in a form to kind of motivate that kind of action. And we don't, at this point in the Q&A, we can get a few answers. We don't have to necessarily have everyone, and we'll go through maybe a rapid fire because we have 10 more questions left in our 25 minutes. Go for it, Vivian.
Yeah, I would definitely say what gets measured gets managed. And so dashboards are like your best friend, especially, Allison, like on the private equity side, we were private equity at one point, and the CFO, your chief procurement officer, you have a lot of people that you need to report out to create that, ROI. So instead of just return on investment, we also start talking about return on inclusion. And that is, representation, it's associate referrals, it's your kind of net promoter score within your own organization. Are associates referring associates? Are they referring small business clients? Look at your retention, attrition, performance, engagement, look at client happiness, whatever that client is. And then it's, impact in your communities. And some of those are longer terms, and they're definitely like stair steps. But strategic companies and leaders look at those because they know, no matter what, we say all the time, we are technology driven. The only thing moving faster than technology is the consumer's expectation of technology to, fill the needs. But we're always going to be people powered. Any organization will always be people powered. And when the opportunity lost costs and attrition and brain drain are two things that will kill any company, no matter, private, public, industry, across the board.
So I'm going to go to another, go for it, Casey, and then I'll go on to another question.
Yeah, so actually delivering data on motivation is what we do at Attuned.ai. So we're kind of overwhelmed in data and have tons of it. But like delivering those dashboards, I just want to kind of share a couple of interesting pieces of data that we've seen, like across thousands and thousands of people in different geographies is, between generation, you hear a lot, about millennials and Generation Z, they're motivated by different things. Statistically, there is no difference in how the motivations kind of go. So they're the motivations that, the boomer generation have versus Generation Z, statistically, they fall there. Everybody in kind of the same type of pattern. So everybody, is motivated by their own unique things depending on kind of the generation. Like gender-wise, there's nothing there as well. Like men and women tend to have the same statistical kind of creation of, what is the motivators for them intrinsically? And then just interesting with Corona, like we've seen a lot of data before Corona and motivators after Corona, and this has been a huge life event. So it's really shifted people's values. And like some of the changes in values, you could certainly guess, like people's needs for feedback has gone up. So, across tens of thousands of people, that's gone up by 7% in terms of people's needs. People's needs for more security in the work has gone up. People's desire for competition and actually innovation at this time has actually gone down. But kind of the biggest surprise in the data that we saw is the biggest jump in people's needs for motivation has come in terms of rationality. Like when this world is so uncertain and, organizations, it's uncertain, they want more clear direction and more clear logic about what is going on here. So, there's a lot of information in the data, and certainly data can help you make better decisions on that.
Fascinating data, and it actually brings us to another question, because to talk about how this moment has changed everything. A question here about self-care, how you promote it in your context, how important you think it is, and what that looks like in settings that may be high pressure, and what it looks like in settings that may be low wage and essential. And so just want to open that up to the group. I realize you may not see all of those contexts, but for the pieces of it that you see, eager to hear your thoughts on how you promoted self-care.
Well, you're not going to hear me say that I go running now. So, but
Kim looks like she wants to answer it, I think, right?
No, I was listening. So I think, well, now I'm on the spot, so I will. I think it is a very different place where I think for our managers, they've had to realize that has to be a component of their management. And in teams where I could say if there's anything that's consistent, our management teams within each member office has been that like the district might be very disconnected from the personal office here in DC, and we've had to force a space where people are able to communicate together, are able to come together and able to address issues in a more collaborative space, and more of an acknowledgement that stress is a component of the work, because we've just had to deal with it in a way that we haven't had to before. Like, this was probably the longest stretch I've had with my daughter not popping into it. And this is because school has started this week. And like, in the background, we are living and breathing with each other as individuals, and with each other and their families, and with each other and their work. And so it's just really pushed us to have to think about how managers are doing a better job to find a way to communicate that they are concerned about their employees and that they want to support their needs, and to think about whether or not they're doing that for themselves. I think it's been kind of a overwhelming culture shift in getting people to think about, like, no, millennials aren't tired or fragile because they want work-life balance. It's because it's needed, and that we have to think about it, or we're not going to be at our best to be able to be of service. And so I really would say that that has been maybe one of the benefits, that it's pushing people to think about that as a part of how they manage their teams.
And Kemba, if I can just add to what you're saying, and then I'm going to come to the others. I've heard so many CEOs, and these are primarily in knowledge-based companies, so they're only one piece of the economy, but say that they are seeing their employees be more productive than ever, and it has totally transformed their views about work-life balance and how they can promote it, and how much more possible it will be for people to work from home after this moment. And it's also been very telling, to your point, to have CEOs talk about what it's like to see into people's homes and understand greater context and really treat people in the context of their full lives. Allison, we're going to come to you next, and then it looks like Casey, and then Vivian.
Sure, and I probably don't have too much to say, but I think self-care, that's really hard, right? Because it's so individual. So I think some of it is just leadership, giving people the freedom to know that these are difficult times, and appreciating them and reminding them. So when I was talking about Neil, our founder, he did take the time, because we were working on deals, nonstop, because this time also opens up a lot of opportunity. But he took the time to probably send maybe 40 people a note to just remind them, your family is really important, take care of yourself, we appreciate your work, but don't forget about you, type of message. Which, when that's coming from the top dog, like that's huge. Like, you can't ask for anything better. And then I would say, after George Floyd's murder, and everybody's kind of just looking around like, did this really happen? Like, what is going on? And everybody's kind of isolated in their homes. So one thing that we did do is have the King Center come in a few days following that to do a facilitated conversation, so people could get off their minds, what they were thinking. Because even as like a predominantly white firm, because we're still active on our journey of creating more visible differences, there was a lot of people that were just upset and hurting, and it's hard to focus, it's hard to think, and you're thinking about your friends, and I think just that acknowledgement of your feelings are okay right now, and you have a right to feel this way, it's not all about work. I think that went a far way too, to promote those self-care moments where someone just has to check out and take care of their mental health.
Thank you, Allison. Casey?
Yeah, I just want to add a +1 with what Kemba started out and Allison has just added to there, is that acknowledgement. And I think acknowledgement is critical. Sometimes it's hard for us to acknowledge, the problems that we have in ourselves, but if we can do that for somebody else and, ask them about what they're going through, acknowledge and recognize that. And I think the key is the more understanding we can deliver, it just connects directly to compassion, right? So if we can understand them more, our teams more as manager, we can deliver more compassion. And, this remote work, as you mentioned, Seth, is kind of facilitating that, because we're used to working in high context environments where we walk around and we could do management by walking around and feel kind of what is the energy, or somebody looks a little bit down. But now we have to take more of a step to ask, right? And, we can see them in, their natural habitats and environments, and it can facilitate a, kind of a better conversation, a more open conversation, as long as we as managers deliver that acknowledgement and deliver that understanding, which ultimately leads to the compassion.
Vivian, any thoughts to add?
Yeah, I just love Casey's, naming, like holding space and labeling and naming what's happening right now in all the varied ways, because we've always had work and then had an entire life outside of that. It's just that work was never really the place maybe to discuss that. And now there's no way not to. And also, acknowledge that, we do have single parents, we have caregivers, every something outside of work, and the more that we meet them where they're at and support them, that's what leadership is to reduce obstacles and empower and resource, and never has that really been distilled in the reasons whys, because we'll make or break our own teams by how we do that to reduce burnout, and keep people engaged and connected through this.
So a theme that we've talked about is the role of leaders in communication and really building buy-in. And a question that we got in the Q&A, which I think is really interesting, is how much do the voices of team members need to shape what happens at the enterprise level for people to feel included and purposive? The specific question asks, how much does a company need to resemble democracy? We know there's a clear distinction, but I think this idea of, there's leaders communicating outward and saying how they find purpose, finding these intersections, but how much do employees need to shape the institution for them to feel that purpose and sense of self in it? And I'm curious what your reflections are on that topic.
I love this topic. I think we're still learning, and there's not enough organizations challenging that, right? Can we make more and more organizations more democratic? And I think if you can, where that employee voice and that employee power is kind of matching the organizational power, that creates kind of the corridor, right, for kind of liberty and creativity to develop. And I think that we're going to get a lot more innovation out of it that way, rather than this kind of command and control style that still resides in way too many organizations. So I'm trying to do it, and I'm challenging kind of every day. It's uncomfortable. It's really uncomfortable, to open up well, we have to, make money. We have to be profitable. We have to grow. We have shareholders to do this. And then democracy is messy. And there are emotion, there's anger and stuff like that. And how do you deal with that? Is that a direct attack on me, or is that because they care and have ownership on the organization? And these are skills, as a leader of a business, I hadn't learned how to deal with democracy that. So I'm trying to learn. I'd love to challenge more and more organizations to open it up more and see where this can go. And I think it's an experiment that has to happen.
Thank you, Casey. And I will just say it's an experiment that is happening in some places. And I'll come back to Chobani. They were one of the awardees of our center for their leadership on social innovation in business. And one of their examples is Chobani Shares, where everyone who is a full member of their team, whether it's the janitor or the person on the factory floor or the leadership team, actually has a share in the company. And that was something that, again, was just part of the DNA that Hamdi wanted to build, because he believed he was building this together with rather than for. And so, Vivian, you are nodding, and so I'm going to turn it over to you, because it sounds like you may have a similar approach at Fiserv.
We do. Our CEO, Frank Bisignano, we used to call our associates owner associates. And the idea was that, when you own it, you're a part of it. And it's not like they're making decisions, it's we're making decisions. But I do think this is another one where representation matters. And the more people, the more diversity that you have throughout your organization through levels and functions and areas, and the better off you'll be, because that's how you get that two-way feedback, when you don't have to have these huge stand-ups where you have these every quarter or year, but it's this continuous, to Casey's point, corridor, where it's dialogue, and it's a virtuous cycle of growth together. And it's hard. I don't think anyone's, doing it perfectly, but I think if together we have a lot of imperfect progress, and just, that together is better than, imperfect nobody's. I don't know who's perfected it.
Allison Kemba, any final thoughts? Go for it, Allison.
We're just such a different animal. I don't feel like I'm authorized to answer this question. In private equity, once you get past a certain level, even when you're young, you start to get ownership in those more equity in those funds and things like that. So I think there's a built-in loyalty to that, but it's also a very flat organization because it's always been the fabric to have diverse perspectives and everyone speak up. And it's not uncommon for Neil to look at the youngest person or most inexperienced person in the room and ask them for their viewpoint. And just a small example for my work was when we wrote our diversity, equity, and inclusion principle for the firm. And Neil's like, be vulnerable and like don't think you have to have all the answers. Go talk to people. And so it ended up taking me a couple months, but we wrote it with over half the firm contributing, editing, and just making sure that we did it. So I would use the word collaboration instead of maybe democracy, because somebody has to make the final decision. But yeah, that's what I would say. I just love the concept of the collaboration.
Well, so I'm going to bring us to our final question here, and it is about how you begin addressing purpose and meaning in companies where you have a multi-generational staff, where there may be wide differences in people's politics and views. Something I'm sure, Kemba, you can't imagine, being at the House of Representatives where everyone agrees, I'm told, on all the big issues. So this will be a popcorn style, but really curious to hear kind of how you think about this, and if there are any examples of how you've even done this where there are very different motivations, views, but in this moment of reckoning, for example, with systemic racism, this has obviously been something that has been present for many companies, even many companies who courageously came out and made bold statements that were not 100% viewed positively, but did it because the leader or leaders felt that that was the right thing to do. But really curious for all of you to just share how you've thought about this. Certainly for Kemba, Vivian, and Allison, I'm imagining there's significant variation in all those things, just given the scale of what you're up to. And Casey, it may be true for you, given you're building an enterprise, and often there's a lot of varied views in how you build an enterprise early on. Go for it, Kemba.
This is an interesting question for us to answer from thinking of like the messiness of democracy. Like the House of Representatives is the people's house. And so it is in design a messy and the messiest of democracies. But with each individual office, there is more of an alignment within the office on ideology and background and like the perspective of needs. So there's this combination of where there are both things. The members get to disagree kind of in open forum. From a committee perspective, there is agreement and disagreement there. But from most of our employees' perspectives, there's more of a direct alignment with the viewpoint and the thought process. And so why we do have that, I mean, the difference in most of the members' ages as opposed to our junior employees, which are, let's say, half our workforce is under 32. And so there's that, most of the people who are feeding and informing and doing the research and all of that kind of collective policy work are that need for that in terms of the generation divide and all of that is kind of baked into what makes good policy. But then it's up to the hierarchy to then do the argument across. So within offices, I would say our workforce is just a little different in that it's seen as beneficial in terms of how the members prepared and organized. And then that kind of elevates through the ranks, and so that the members can do what they do and do it very well.
Well, thank you for doing what you do so that they can do their work. And I'm going to turn it over to the others here with a charge for your 60-second or less answer, just so that we close on time. Allison, you're up for the power round here.
Okay, so just really quickly, I don't think a purpose has to align with politics or worldviews. Just going back to our earlier conversation today, it needs to be about what's unique to your company and what's timeless and aspirational. So I would just push on that a little bit to think about it more as just how your company's why is being articulated.
Thank you, Allison. Vivian and Casey?
Yeah, I would say, it's funny, in all my work in diversity and inclusion, when we focus on diversity, I find that people end up being more alike. We have more in common, whether it's generational or gender or ethnicity or race, international. It's, you want to be part of a meaningful work, getting paid, measurably, and have trust and give trust. And so when you can align those things, they're better off. And I would also say, to Allison's point, meeting people where they're at. So some people want to volunteer, some people want to donate, some people want to coach, some people want to look at resumes, some want, there's a variety of things that they can do to engage them. And the more that you have a buffet for that, meeting them where they're at, the more likely, regardless of any one demographic, you'll meet the needs for engagement.
Casey, you have our final word on what has been a phenomenal panel.
It has been a phenomenal panel, so thank you very much. It's been great and well moderated, Seth. I think fantastic. I would just say, you have to plant your flag as an organization about what you're about. What are your values? What are you trying to drive? And this will attract like-minded and like-hearted people, right? And really broadcasting that message. And then I think in terms of the psychological profile is the behaviors can be very different between generations, but you can still have the same value set. And you just have to create a culture that is psychologically safe, right? So that people can, have their own behaviors, but it meets the culture of norms of that organization. So that psychological safety is there. So you get the alignment plus none of that messy stuff that you don't really want in the workplace.
Well, let me just say a huge thank you to the four of you as panelists. This has been a delight to moderate because you are so purposive, which was the goal of this panel. And you've actually brought us to the best practices of how to instill this purpose into our companies and into the minds of our employees, which we know has great results for performance and for impact in the world. And so thank you. And I'm going to turn it back over to Steve Kopp from Day One.
Thank you, Seth, and our wonderful speakers. That was a great conversation. Thanks to Allison, Casey, Kemba, and Vivian. Thank you to Attuned and Achievers and to all of you for participating today. If you'd like to join us for more virtual events, you can head to our website, fromday1.co, and check out more of our upcoming webinars. Tuesday, September 10th, we'll be looking at fostering a community while working remotely. Thursday, September 22nd, we'll be looking at turning workforce aspirations into company policy, why employee fulfillment matters more than ever. On Thursday, September 24th, we'll be doing our second full-scale virtual conference with panel discussions, workshops, and networking. The focus is on how to lead now, managing change and building resilience. Visit our website at fromday1.co to learn more. Thank you all very much and stay well.